Welcome to the kitchen at Lynbreck, Croft, near Grantlands Bay. I'm Lynn White from Soil Association Scotland. We are here with livestock expert Dr. Lindsay Whistance from the Organic Research Centre and Sandra Baer, who runs a croft on the edge of the cairngorms within castles. Unfortunately, Lynn is away on an egg club delivery, so can't be with us at the moment. For the next half an hour, we'll be chatting about the benefits of tree fodder for animal health and nutrition. And we are happy to answer your questions. Just write in the comments section below. So, welcome ladies.
Thank you.
First question to Lindsay. Thank you for participating this evening.
Well,
Lindsay, can you tell us about some of the benefits of trees to animal health and welfare, please?
I can do. If we set aside the tree fodder for one moment, then trees in the landscape offer shade, offer shelter, offer protection for young animals, so that more lambs survive and young stock grow faster, where they're not using energy to keep warm. If we think about trees as a source of food, they compare generally very well with grasses grown within that system in terms of protein and energy, but they are an excellent source of minerals. The level of minerals can differ depending on the species and the time of year, but otherwise a very good source. And they also provide medicinal properties. A classic example would be salicylic acid in willow, which is the chemical that is used in aspirin, the painkiller in humans. Salicylic acid has both pain-killing properties, but also anti-inflammatory, antipyretic, fungicidal properties. So quite a good all-round medicine to have in the field.
Great to know. Sandra, you've obviously been on the croft here a wee while now, and you've planted different types of tree. How do you see the trees supporting the livestock in that sense, like Lindsay's been saying?
Well, we're quite lucky in that we've got a fair few established trees already and strips of woodland, so we can already see the benefit of a mature woodland to this livestock. And mainly so far, as Lindsay touched on, is the shelter element and shade. So we have Highland cattle, so they've got thick coats. They're hardy anyway. So in winter they occasionally will want to go and seek shelter during blizzards and high winds and such like. But we've actually noticed that even more so than winter, it's summer when they particularly seek shade in the trees.
Right.
Because of course with those coats they do suffer when it's really hot. So we've already seen that benefit. So we've only had cattle for a couple of years, so it's still early days in terms of seeing health benefits, and we're only just starting to trial incorporating tree fodder into their diets. But what I can say is we watch them closely, and we do notice that on many occasions when we move them into mob grazing paddocks with trees, they'll ignore all the grass and they'll go straight for tree leaves, mainly birch in our case, and occasionally also bog myrtle shrubs. So they're obviously targeting those for a reason, and we think medicinal or mineral, but that's something to learn from, definitely.
It's really interesting that they're actually going for the trees before they go for grass, especially when they're being mob grazed and moved on and that type of thing, that they're actually going for the trees first. That's an interesting take to see, kind of thing on that, rather than the grass always being the thing that they want to eat, kind of thing.
Absolutely.
This is typically what you find though when animals are moved from one environment to another. When they don't have permanent access to something, then entry into the field will cause a burst of browsing. You know, they check out the hedgerows, they check out the trees before they check out the grasses. But if they have permanent access to all of the environment, what you tend to find is that they will fill up on grasses morning and evening, and then they'll be more selective during the daytime. I say grasses and forbs, and then browse more in the daytime. It's not an absolute, but the pattern slightly changes when they've got free choice.
So they're just kind of checking out the menu, kind of thing, in that sense.
Yeah. Well, it might be that there's an imbalance, and when they have an entry, you know, when they are given access to it, then because of that imbalance, the first thing they do is try to regain balance.
Really interesting. So we've been talking about trees and that, and you talked about bog myrtle and that. Is there any kind of benefit looking at difference between hedgerows and woodlands and that kind of thing, or is it just a case of they'll take from certain plants at certain times, or is there a big difference between the two, or is it just the fact that they choose to take certain things?
Well, I mean, partly there's a mechanical difference. So in a woodland you've got a certain amount of a tree that's accessible.
Mm-hmm.
If we talk about sheep, then the browse height for sheep will be about 1.2 metres. For cattle it'll be about 2 metres. So if you've brought cattle in and then you bring sheep in, then there'll be no browse available to the sheep. So, you know, there can be mechanical limitations, and similar with hedgerows also. If you back fence a hedge, which most people do, then there's physical limitations to what they can access. But with a hedgerow, if they're managed and cut, which they typically are, then you'll get a lot of young growth, which is accessible if the animals have access to it at that time. But you will still see selection. If you've got mixed hedges, you will still see selection, and there will be preferred species in the hedge that will be taken first. What I've seen, ash tends to go quite quickly, which is also a traditional tree fodder tree in the UK. Elm is quite quickly browsed, also a traditional tree fodder. But, you know, I mean, most of them will get browsed at some point.
And it's interesting you said about the birch being taken as the kind of looking at the birch and the choice and that kind of thing. Is there any, like you were saying about the willow and that, is there any other properties nutritionally within those then that they will maybe go to that one particular or anything like that?
Well, particularly for minerals, some trees are better at harvesting minerals from the ground than others. So willow is very good at harvesting zinc. And within willow, you have some species which are super at harvesting. So Salix viminalis has very, very high levels of zinc compared to other species, but also other varieties of willow. And we know this, it's a tree that's often used to clean up polluted land. Copper is very high in hazel. It's also high in beech, but beech is less palatable to the animals. So if you're looking for a copper supplement, then perhaps hazel is the one to go for.
And you've planted quite a number of trees round about the Croft and that. Were you conscious of what you actually planted round about for going forward in that, from even a shelter point of view and a browsing point of view? Did you be quite selective in that?
Yeah, I suppose it depends a bit on we've done different types of planting, and then the underlying decision is always what will grow here. You know, what is suited to this kind of land and climate. So we started out with a large woodland planting scheme of 17,500 trees, and these were all native broadleaves that will grow well at this altitude as well. We're not allowed to put our livestock in there for the next 15 to 20 years, but in future that will be the perfect sheltered hill grazing ground for our cattle, and we've got a large variety of trees for them to choose from. So it's a long-term investment, but it's going to be hugely important for the animals' well-being as well, and just the diversity up there too. We've also planted just under 1 kilometre of hedgerow. So up here we know hawthorn will do well, so it's a lot of hawthorn mixed in with some other varieties. And we've tried to connect up all the woodlands and basically encompass all the fields. So the fields are now all surrounded by trees, and the hedgerows will, once they bush out, will be available to the livestock in the fields. And we've also done a bit of agroforestry planting, and that was with the livestock in mind, as fodder or as a fodder supplement. So it's mainly willow and alder planted in copses that we can harvest as tree hay. So we do that in the summer and then dry it out as winter fodder. And we've planted a willow hedge, and that's 3 different kinds of willow in there, and it's in part as shelter, part we're also thinking we'll coppice that in sections and possibly feed it to them in summer when they've got no access to trees. So it's a bit of a trial, but that was our sort of actual agroforestry project.
So look at that, that's great. Just you were talking about the trees that you've planted and everything like that, and you've mentioned certain ones. Is there, if somebody's looking at, again, it's important that you grow trees that are actually going to grow in your climate, and you look round about and see what's there. Is there any kind of, like when we look at grasses, we look at different mixes and that kind of thing. Is there something that you would have that would be a mixture for a certain kind of browsing paddock or a browsing area or anything like that you would kind of think, but we need a bit of that, need a bit of that? Is there anything, not too formulaic, but something that you can choose from, kind of thing?
I mean, it would be lovely if we can get to a point where that has been established, just like it has for diverse lays. You know, you get groups of herbs that do well together and do well in specific systems. That so far has not been established, as far as I know, for trees. And we're having to learn and relearn a huge amount of things in a fairly short space of time, because there's a real interest in bringing trees back into an animal's environment for various reasons. Of course, these were traditional systems, but we've lost a lot of that knowledge. When we started feeding winter beets, we almost dropped tree fodder overnight, and lost the knowledge that goes with it. So it would be quite interesting to see, you know, how these new systems develop and learn from them as we go along. I'm particularly interested to see how the alder works in your system, because it's on the bottom of the list in terms of palatability. But maybe that's just browsing. You know, maybe using it as tree hay might increase its palatability. I mean, if nothing else, it will be a good tree to have in the environment if it thrives here.
Definitely.
It has other benefits, and if the animals don't like eating it, well, then you get the mulch that benefits the ground. You know, you get the recycling of minerals to the ground as well as to the animals. So it doesn't mean that alder isn't a good tree to plant, but maybe finding a way of feeding it, or not.
Well, we'll find out.
But it's a learning process, isn't it? A learning curve.
Well, our hope is that maybe introducing it as tree hay in small portions in winter, when the animals possibly want something other than normal grass hay, and they might find it just that bit more interesting, but we won't know until we try.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think we know why it's so unpalatable. And it isn't that it's never browsed. It can be, but it's one of the few trees that even deer don't.
And then you see if deer are eating it, it can be like.
Even when other species are being protected, where there's deer damage, you don't need to.
We might have a lot of shelter down there.
Exactly, it's going to be a benefit, whatever it is.
It's a win-win,
because it's going to grow well, because you know it's going to grow well and everything like that. But
exactly.
Well, it's actually unfortunate because, you know, I mean, it is a nitrogen fixing tree, and it's gained a lot of interest for that reason. And when you do nutritional analysis on it, it actually comes out quite well.
It's got a high protein content.
Yeah, it does.
As well.
Yes.
So, yes. We shall wait and see.
Well, I'll report back.
We've got a question.
Oh, right, thanks, Glenn. What's the question?
How do you make tree hay?
Now, you've practically done it. We've just been down in the shed. I have seen it, so you've practically done it, so we have the practical experience here in the room.
Well, it's limited experience, but we're just starting to trial making tree hay. So what tree hay is, it's basically, it's the same idea as cutting grass hay, or grass for grass hay in summer. So you grow trees and you want them fairly whippy still. You don't want massive branches, so you cut off the thinner growth, and then you bundle it up and you hang it or stand it somewhere to dry over summer as winter feed. So we've only just done a trial now. We've got our first tree hay drying in the shed, and we'll feed it out this winter and see how the animals do and just see what the practicalities are. What we have noticed is, of course, you need quite a bit more space. The bundles
are very bulky.
They're quite bulky. You try and cut most of the woodier stuff off, but we see it as a supplement. I mean, it will never be a main feed, and we'll try and find ways of hanging it up around the edge of the shed just to make it more practical. But we're very intrigued to see how the cattle react to it.
It was interesting as well, just when we were in the shed there, you had nettles as well, and Lindsay commented that even if like in a paddock grazing system or a mob grazing system, they're not tending to eat them when they're standing, but if you cut them a couple of days beforehand, they'll go in, and then obviously the nutritional benefit of nettles pretty.
Yeah, then they clean them up. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, there are a few things to consider when you're making tree hay. As you say, you have to have the room. But last year I picked quite a lot of different species, just a couple of small branches of each one to take them around for presenting. And while I had them out in the shed at work, they were really good, and the leaves dried and they were quite leathery. And then I brought them in overnight, and within a few hours of being in a warm room, they started to become brittle. And then you're effectively losing the most important bit of it. So the drying conditions are quite important to preserving the best bit.
So you're not losing all that
Yeah.
what you've got there.
Yeah.
So temperature plays a part in that as well.
Well, it does seem to, and perhaps the dryness. Out in a farm shed, they were just hung up on the wall, and they did very well.
Right.
Yeah.
And so from a humidity point of view, you just want as much airflow
Yes, I
around
guess
as
so.
possible.
Yeah.
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 Just for you possibly joining us later on, I'm Lynn White from the Soil Association, and we're joined here at Lynbreck Croft by Dr Lindsay Whistance from the Organic Research Centre, and Sandra Baer from Lynbreck Croft. We've got a question through. It says, where can you access the nutritional and trace element analysis of the different species? I think that may be one for you, Lindsay.
Yeah. Well, there's still a lot to know. At the Organic Research Centre, we've been collaborating with Nottingham University, Bangor, GWCT, the Woodland Trust. Apologies if I've left anyone out. I have a feeling I have. But we've been collecting tree leaves over the beginning of the summer and the end of the summer, and doing mineral analysis on them. It's not published yet, but we've been finding some really interesting things. So there are definitely species differences, but there are also seasonal differences where some minerals are high at the beginning of the summer and low at the end of the summer, and some with the opposite. What we're also finding there are site differences between some of the species also. There is a website online which is managed from the Netherlands. They have searched through all of the literature and created a database of what is known up to the point, and it's a live database, so we'll continually add to it and encourage others to do so if they have data. So they have to get in touch with the website managers. I don't know if it's possible to put a link if people are interested.
That's not a problem. It was interesting you were saying about the analysis, because we were down feeding the pigs earlier on, and there's a lot of bog myrtle there.
Yeah.
And you said you hadn't come across it, and Sandra quite. Well, it's one of these things that you were saying already, where the cattle went in there and they just loved it, kind of thing. And it's speculation on why they were eating it so quick, but again, it's interesting maybe just to have that looked at as well. Kind of
yeah,
thing.
certainly. Yeah. But we have to be a little bit cautious about if they don't meet these things very often, these food sources very often, and there is an imbalance of something which that plant fulfills. It might be that they only need a very small amount of it, and their keenness to eat it is more a reflection of the imbalance rather than the general
norm.
Yes, usefulness of the plant that they're accessing.
I suppose it's like everything else, it's variety that you want to give them more as anything else. It's kind of a bit of this,
yes,
that
exactly
kind of thing, rather than that's your lot kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to an analysis of availability of trace elements and nutrients and minerals in trees, how would you portray that when obviously the availability of it in soil can differ so much?
Yeah. Well, turns out I've just been reading about this a couple of days ago, so
That's handy.
thankfully.
That's handy, very handy.
Yeah. Back in the 80s, I think an ecologist proposed 3 mechanisms which plants have towards metals in the soil. So because some soils are polluted, then trees manage these levels differently. So some trees are called accumulators. I can't remember all of the terms, but effectively the accumulators allow the mineral to, if you like, invade all parts of the plant, or at least move from the root system to the tops and tolerate it. So this is why zinc, for example, is a very good tree for using for polluted areas, because they are accumulator plants. Then you have trees, because no plants can stop these metals going into the plant, the opposite end of the scale is to limit it to the roots. So they take it up, but they don't allow these metals to then go up into the over the ground part of the plants. And then you have other plants that are intermediates, and they simply reflect what's available in the soil. So if you have an accumulator plant, it will always have high levels of a particular metal, regardless of what's in the soil. The intermediate reflects what's in the soil, and I can't remember the name of it, but the opposite end contain it within the root system, so you don't see it reflected in the upper parts of the plant.
What was the one you said it's quite high in zinc? What was the
Willow.
Willow. It's
Yeah.
quite high in zinc.
Yeah, and poplar is quite good at.
So I know you've only limited kind of experience with this, but have you seen anything in particular with the livestock or that? You said about the shade and that kind of thing, but the other thing, even having the poultry and things like that, have you seen anything that the trees have given you that you weren't expecting or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I suppose it was like there's examples of them choosing particular tree species or shrubs for browsing. We have, whilst making the willow tree hay, I have also used offcuts to feed to the pigs, so sort of twiggy bits. And they very quickly caught on to the fact that stripping the bark off was something that they wanted to do, and they eat it. So they're very adept at it too. So they're obviously wanting it for whatever reason, and then they run around with the sticks and play.
Well,
because that's what pigs do.
Exactly. Highly intelligent animals.
Yeah. But even the hens, I was really surprised that they came and pecked at the pith of the willow sticks, and also whilst I was cutting the willow off the stem, they'd come and peck at it. So there was something that attracted them as well. So it's not just cattle and sheep. It's other animals that seem to know what to go for.
I've got another question. What kind of willow do you have? Do you want to repeat it?
What kind of willow? I think you said you planted 3 different types.
Yeah, so in the agroforestry bit, we planted what we knew would grow here. That was sort of our main thing. So it was eared willow, grey willow and goat willow. And we just happened to have osier growing around the garden as well, which is what I cut now for tree hay because it just happened to be available. But the other 3 are the main sort of native species that we know will do well.
And how often are you kind of cutting that back? And that, I know it depends on what soils and that kind of thing, but how often are you actually kind of having to, like for giving the pigs a bit and everything like that, how often are you?
Well, to be honest, the osier is it's about that thickness at the minute, so it's growing quite well. So every year we seem to just get shoots coming off it that are ideal for tree hay, I think. All the willow that we planted, they're about this height now, and if they continue at this rate, we'll be doing our first coppice in maybe 4 years' time, 4 or 5 years' time.
Which is quite a quick turnaround when you're thinking about kind of trees as a crop kind of thing. Everybody thinks about decades and that kind of thing, but you can actually utilise them as quickly as that kind of thing.
Yeah, and you want to encourage that kind of bushy growth of the thinner, twiggier bits rather than just a massive big stem. Yeah.
So when it goes, you'll be actually managing that in quite a way that actually is benefiting the plant and what you actually want from it in that sense.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Absolutely. Well, we'll just let it do what it wants to do, and we'll just sort of kind of help it on a wee bit and encourage it. Yeah, yeah.
Is there any other kind of management of kind of trees and that kind of thing that actually helps for browsing or that, or is it better just left to their own devices, as you might say, kind of thing, if you were wanting trees to do specific things in specific areas for stock? As you say, on the practical level, if you end up putting the cattle in first, there's nothing for the sheep, which is kind of maybe some people would just even think about kind of thing. But is there anything practical that kind of encouraging them to take from the trees, or do they just naturally do it kind of thing?
Yeah, I think what Sandra has just said, encouraging young growth, new growth, and as much as possible is a sensible thing to do. But it also depends what the trees are there to do. And you might have to have several different methods of managing. So if you're looking at trees for shade and shelter, then you're looking at canopy. And so you need the trees to grow up. But if you're looking at food, then perhaps having browse bars, hedgerows, coppiced for winter fodder are more the way to go forward. But really, yes, you want to optimise your regrowth, if you like, so you're getting the most leaf and young wood as possible.
I suppose getting having a bit of a compromise between shelter, shade, and a lot of young regrowth is to have a rotation.
Yeah.
Where you coppice or pollard a block each year, and you have the rest coming on at different stages. So you'll always have some section with more shelter, and a good succession as well.
The fact that you've now planted kind of around every field and everything like that gives you that much more choice. That you've done that, and again from a biodiversity point of view, wildlife corridors and things like that as well. And in the future as well, depending on climate change and weather and everything like that, having those shelters and that browse and everything like that as well is going to make a big difference for any of the livestock that happens to be in the fields, whether it be pigs, chickens or cattle.
Yes,
needing shade with the temperature going up and things like that, is making them more comfortable and that kind of thing.
And they all browse.
They'll all appreciate the greenery.
Exactly, yes. Everybody gets to appreciate the greenery, not just the livestock. Everybody else around about gets to.
Actually, before we move forward, I realised with the very first question, I forgot to mention condensed tannins as an additional benefit, and that gives multiple benefits. Yes, you have to manage how much condensed tannins go in the diet, but the animals can be quite flexible. But optimally, about 1 to 4% of dry matter provides the most benefit, and what you get from condensed tannins are they help to manage parasites, internal parasites, and they do that by affecting the third L3 larvae of parasites, so they prevent them from maturing, and the ones that do mature as a smaller worm. So they're producing fewer eggs for the next generation. So that's really beneficial. The second benefit you get from condensed tannins is that it, because it binds proteins, it goes through the rumen, but it then gets released in the more acidic abomasum. So you're effectively delivering good quality rumen bypass protein with high quality amino acids. And that in itself can also help the animal fight internal parasite burdens. The third thing you get from condensed tannins is a reduction in methane. So from the same level of willow, you'll get half the methane produced from alfalfa.
Oh, yeah. Good thing all round then. Not one thing, three things.
Three things. Yeah.
Just to say, we've had a few more questions come in. Is there anything kind of trees that might be dangerous for them to eat, or are they quite, again, are they selective and they know obviously if they're browsing, or is there some things that you shouldn't just make hay out of kind of thing?
Well, that I can't answer. I don't know about hay. I mean, certainly there are poisonous trees. Yew is a classic example. You wouldn't willingly plant yew in a stock field. But that's not to say they don't browse a little bit. What we have to be careful of is that everything is toxic if you eat too much of it.
Right, yes.
So understanding choice, diversity, and let's not forget animal knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
That
So I'm
they
saying
can,
they know what they.
yes, that they have time to learn. If they do take a little bit, they have time to learn about those
Effects.
the effects of it, and avoid it, or take as much as they need and no more. So I would probably either go for a great mix and let the animals choose, or go for perhaps safer traditional forages, ones that have, even if they haven't been used in this country, certainly there are some used across the world, and particularly Scandinavia have a good reputation, Norway and Sweden, for tree fodder. Quite a diverse repertoire there, but here traditionally ash, elm and holly, and then in Norway birch, rowan, also ash, elm and holly, and I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but for sure they browse a much wider scope than that. Hazel is well browsed, some oak.
And obviously hedges as well, you were talking about earlier on, they kind of pick away at them as
Yes,
well.
they do,
like the hawthorn and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, and there are times of year where things are more palatable than others. You wouldn't necessarily make tree hay out of hawthorn because when thorns are hardened off, you know, I mean they're an anti-herbivore mechanism. So, but then they are browsed upon quite heavily
in the springtime.
Yes.
I've noticed that at home, kind of
Yeah.
thing, that's the lambs, that's the first thing they eat before they eat grass or anything like
Yeah.
that. They eat the wee hawthorn.
Yes.
Can you fit in a quick answer of those two questions,
Right,
and
sorry,
we need to
sorry.
wrap up?
Right. Is there, no, we've done this, my glasses on. Is there a difference in browsing between each different willow? Or is that again just selective on what animals will eat, kind of thing?
Well, there certainly is some selective browsing. I can't remember who it was, but there was a study done on different levels of salicylic acid in willow and in poplar. Sheep were given a choice of different willows with different levels, and those sheep at that moment chose the species of willow with the highest salicylic acid. So yes, and they can tell the difference, but you don't necessarily know why they're choosing it.
That's the thing, why you need a variety in that sense, that rather than just having one, you've got three and you've got the other one there as well, that you know
Yes.
they can help away. So again, it's like grass or anything like that, you want a bit of variety.
Good from
Yes.
a buffet.
Exactly. And here we go, this is an interesting one. How many bundles are useful to gather per beast as a winter supplement?
Ooh.
I don't have that answer to hand, but I know a book that does.
Another one for the website or the after comment?
Yes.
That'd be really useful.
So yes, we will take that forward and get back to you, as they say. So thank you, ladies, for your answering the questions and everything, and I hope everybody else is enthralled as I am about trees at the moment. So thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Sandra.
You're very welcome.